Annual flowers are fundamental when crafting your cottage garden,
especially during those awkward, ugly duckling first years when your pricey perennials take their sweet old time establishing root systems, hidden from our eyes.
And while gardening has its way of teaching patience, we want instant results.
So let's go over 7 cottage garden annuals that promise instant success,
Revealing their strengths and weaknesses through my experience growing them.
to rank them and declare our own.
Cottage garden conqueror.
We'll grade them under 7 categories: ease of cultivation, location flexibility, speed and duration of bloom, impact in bloom, pest and disease resistance, color. In the Double Valley wildcard category, does it cottage?
Place your bets in the comment section and let the games begin.
Let's start with contestant number 1, marigolds.
Marigold is the underdog here. Being the queen of the Mexican Day of the Dead, it's often overlooked in a cottage garden. I class it under the bushy form, as I explained in the plant selection episode of the Cottage Garden Design Masterclass series, making it suitable to fill up the garden beds.
Ease of cultivation.
Under ease of cultivation, ideally I would give it 5 out of 5 blooms. They do germinate very easily. They're a simple flower to grow, and I could even try to broadcast it outside. But the reason why I like to pre-sprout them before is just to have a little bit more control over where they go. While I like to grow them in soil blocks to transplant them to the garden in their final location, they also germinate rather reliably when the seed is simply broadcast in their final place. This way of growing marigold seedlings seems to be a perfect one. I think they have really adapted to growing into small soil blocks. Once they start blooming, they need constant deadheading. Otherwise, they set seed and die. For that reason, I'm giving it 4 out of 5 blooms.
Location flexibility.
For location flexibility, I give it 3 blooms. That's because they're really good in sunny places, but in partial shade they can become a bit more gangly and don't flower as much.
Speed and duration of bloom.
A few weeks after they get established, they start blooming. And if you keep the deadheading regimen, they will bloom all the way up until fall. If you fail to do that, they'll only last until midsummer. For that reason, I give it 4 blooms out of 5.
Impact and bloom.
They are showy plants. They take the limelight when it comes to punchy color. But I feel like the shape of the flowers is quite boring, to be honest. It resembles crumpled tissue paper. They don't have the sculptural quality that other plants like zinnias do. Because of this flaw, I give them 4 out of 5 in this category.
Pest and disease resistance.
Marigolds are known as plant soldiers in the garden. They protect other plants from critters like nematodes. They are especially strong plants, and that alone should earn them 5 out of 5 in this category. However, in my case, groundhogs just love to eat them. They're attracted to the buds and they eat everything. So if I don't have a plant, I really can't give it anything other than 1 out of 5.
Color.
Color-wise, they are lacking in my opinion. Now, they do have some of the brightest oranges and yellows out there. However, that is part of the problem for me. I think the color is rather flat. They just yell too loud without the elegance that a lily or a tulip has, and those can be just as chromatic. For this reason, I have to give it 2 out of 5.
Does it cottage?
For the reasons I mentioned earlier, you can see I'm not a huge fan of marigolds, and they're certainly not the flower that comes to mind when you picture an English cottage garden. So, it has its strengths, but its weaknesses make me rank it 2 out of 5 in this category.
Our contestant number 2 is snapdragons.
It is a reliable bloomer, and it pierces through a garden bed with its colorful spires. For that reason, I class it as both a columnar plant and sort of a sprawler.
Ease of cultivation.
Are they easy to grow? I would say yes. They do have an impossibly tiny seed, and that can be a bit of a hassle in the beginning. But they do transplant well, so pricking them out and potting them up is not really a problem. They go through transplant chalk without much of a hassle. After that, they're really trouble-free. Technically, they're short-lived perennials, or we treat them almost like hardy annuals since they can go through frost. If you keep deadheading them like you do with marigolds, they will keep producing, and because of that, I have to give it at least a 4 out of 5, although I could almost give it a 5 out of 5.
Location flexibility.
I think they're very versatile when it comes to location. They do spectacularly well in sunny places, but they also do surprisingly well in shadier places. This ensures that they get 5 blooms here.
Speed and duration of bloom.
While snapdragons do take a while to start blooming, I really won't count it against them because they start from such tiny seed and also they bloom for such extended period of time.
I need to get these snapdragons in the ground. The weather is still a little bit shaky. We're having cold snaps and it's May already. But if I don't put them now, they are just not going to grow fast enough.
They're amongst the last annuals to keep blooming closer to winter, and they often return the next year if they're in a sunny position. So that means that they clearly deserve 5 blooms here.
Impact and bloom.
They do cause a big impact with their colorful spires, at least in sunny places. They may not have the architectural presence that a lily or an iris has, but they do hold their weight as supporting characters. For that reason, I give them 4 out of 5 here.
Pest and disease resistance.
They're great plants, and they're not affected by most maladies. And best of all, groundhogs don't seem to bother them. They would have scored 5 blooms here if last year I had not noticed that harlequin bugs happen to use it as a host. It's not their preferred host, but they can use it to survive, and that's a problem for my kale and other collards and things of the sort. For that reason, I can't really give it a perfect score, so it's 4 out of 5.
Color.
Color-wise, snapdragons, they deliver. They exist in a spectrum of magenta, pinks, yellows, whites. There are vibrant varieties and more muted ones, so you can definitely find ones that will fit your color scheme. They don't have as much of that muddy, tertiary color harmony that I enjoy, so I'll give it 4 out of 5 here.
Does it cottage?
Snapdragons certainly are perfect in a cottage garden, but you wouldn't miss them if they were not there. For that reason, I give them 4 out of 5.
Our third contestant is stock flower.
Stock flowers are very similar to snapdragons with their columnar form, but you're not going to find them in big box garden centers because they're more of a cool weather crop.
Ease of cultivation.
Stock is easy enough to start from seed, and it's always best to start them as early as possible in the year so that you have enough time to put them out before temperatures rise over 60 Fahrenheit. Otherwise, they don't bloom. In warmer places, they're not really an option, so for that reason, I have to give it only 3 out of 5.
Location flexibility.
This spot here is a bit of a half shade situation, half sun or dappled shade. Since it's the first time I'm growing these plants, I don't know exactly how they perform in terms of sun exposure, so this is how you learn, by trying.
While they bloom well in sun and partial shade, they can only grow successfully in places that have cool springs and summers, so that limits their range. For that reason, I can really only give it 2 blooms out of 5.
Speed and duration of bloom.
They take 2.5 to 3 months from seed to bloom, and they can only do that before temperatures reach 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So, for that reason, they have to score low here and get only 2 out of 5.
Impact in bloom.
When they do flower, stock dazzles.
Now that I've seen this one fully bloomed, I am completely sold on them. I need to plant more of them. They are statement pieces, but they do, I think, even create a better display if I put several of them together.
Their double-flowered form is especially cottage-like, but a quirk in their genetic really makes the blooming unpredictable. The double-flowered form is sterile. Only the single-flowered can produce seed, but they do so by carrying the double form genetically. So you can never know if you're going to get a double or a single one, and you're always going to have some single, even in the better strains. Because of this, they'll only get 4 out of 5 blooms.
Pest and disease resistance. From the times I've grown this plant, I have not noticed any pronounced pest or disease pressure, so I'll give it 5 out of 5 here. Color.
When it comes to pastel pinks and purples, the stock does really well. I wish they had more variety, but I really can't complain of the colors that they do have. For that reason, I give them 4 out of 5.
Does it cottage?
They are absolutely a part of the cottage garden cast of characters. So for this reason, I have to give it a perfect score of 5.
Our fourth contestant is sweet peas.
Sweet peas are the poisonous distant relative of the edible peas. As such, you can only find them in romantic gardens that harken to yesteryear. Obviously, it's classed as a viney plant when it comes to its form, but it doesn't just produce beautiful blooms, it has wonderful scent as well.
Ease of cultivation.
You won't find it in your big box garden store because they really don't transplant well.
First important thing is to get them in the ground as soon as possible. They like cold weather. Get them in late winter in the ground, even 4 to 6 weeks before the last frost date. I'm gonna do something different. I'm gonna start them inside. I just wanna get them to germinate. As soon as they germinate, I'll put them in the ground. As long as you keep the temperatures closer to 55 to 65, then you're gonna get perfect germination from sweet peas. If you have higher temperatures, you will struggle. I've had problems in the past trying my usual germination method over an air vent, and that completely failed. Immediately after you see green shoots, you have to get them in the ground. Sweet peas do not like to be transplanted, so they want to develop their taproot in place.
Sweet peas deserve the low marks here because of their finicky personality. I'm sure there are places out in the world, perhaps England, where the spring is kind of cool and long, and that makes them thrive, but everywhere else, they're a hassle. They can explode with bloom or dwindle after weeks of coaxing. For that reason, I give them 2 out of 5, and I'm being generous.
Location flexibility.
They're highly inflexible when it comes to location. They need just a perfect, well-draining soil, and they need a lot of sunlight. For that reason, I'll give them the lowest grade, 1 bloom out of 5.
Speed and duration of bloom. Sweet peas take their sweet time establishing roots before thinking of scaling a structure and blooming. When they do bloom, they can quickly run to seed. This earns them 1 bloom in this category. Impact and bloom.
When in full bloom, they have their charm and appeal, but they're definitely not impactful flowers. For that reason, they get 2 out of 5.
Pest and disease resistance.
It's official, the sweet peas have been a complete disaster, and the few flowers that are appearing now are less of a consolation prize and just a confirmation that they really didn't grow. They got stunted, and it certainly has to be something in the soil near this porch. Something about that soil just doesn't jive with the sweet peas. And it's weird because I did plant a few of the extra seedlings I had in the old garden, that's my mother's garden, and they have grown. So it wasn't a question really of timing or even method, it's really the soil. Fortunately, there are other plants that I've planted here that are doing great, and it just goes to show that it's important to plant a lot, especially in your first year if you don't know precisely what the soil is like. And that way, if you plant a lot of variety, you'll find the ones that work the best there, and that way you can really use them to your advantage.
My feeble attempts to grow them didn't really reveal a disease per se or a pest, so I'll give it 4 out of 5 for now.
Color.
What they lack in presence, they make up in color. They have beautiful jewel tones of pinks and purples and bluish hues. Sweet peas know how to dazzle when they feel like it. For that reason, I have to give it a 5 out of 5. Now, does it cottage? Most certainly yes. Even asking the question is kinda rude. It is so much a proper cottage garden flower that you almost need to be in England to have it flower correctly. So do they get 5 blooms here? You betcha, and you can see I'm a bit bitter about that one.
Zinnia is our 5th contestant.
Moving on to a more down-to-earth, achievable flower, we have a workhorse for the flower garden, and that's Zinnia. Form-wise, it can act as a bushy plant or a sculptural one.
Ease of cultivation.
It is almost the easiest, most reliable, big impact flower I have growing.
They do not like to be started when it's still too cold. They prefer to be direct seeded,
However, I think it's good to start them indoors before. And this is what I've done in this tray. I've prepared soil blocks. I've sown the seeds. After about 3 to 5 days, they sprouted. And now that the second set of leaves are starting to show, I'm transplanting them into cups. They don't like to be transplanted as much, so you must be careful when you do that. And they much prefer actually to grow directly in the garden. But again, because they like warm temperatures, it's only viable to do that after May in where I am. And here is precisely why it doesn't like to be transplanted. You can see the long taproot. It's trying to find deeper soil, and if it doesn't, and if it's broken, the plant will be stressed and it will not grow well. It germinates rather fast, and it doesn't need the constant deadheading that many other annuals need. They do deserve the 5 blooms in this category.
Location flexibility.
Zinnias are incredibly flexible in terms of location. They grow well in the sunny as well as partial shade conditions. Obviously, they flower better in the sunny spots. For that reason, I give them 4 out of 5.
Speed and duration of bloom.
Once the weather warms up and the plant gets going, it blooms fast and it keeps blooming up until the first frost, if everything goes according to plan. For that reason, I have to give it a 5 out of 5.
Impact in bloom.
Their flowers are anything but timid. If you want impact, you plant zinnias. There are giant ones, tiny ones, candy cane ones, so you're gonna find one that fits your garden. For that reason, they also get 5 here.
Pest and disease resistance.
Considering how reliable they are and how much visual weight they carry, they must have at least some flaw.
While the zinnias look phenomenal at this point, I have a feeling that this is not going to last for much long, so this might be the height of their beauty, only because they're going to be attacked by the groundhog. Unfortunately, a groundhog has found the garden, ate some of the bolting lettuces, and now it's starting to attack some flowers like marigolds, so it's definitely going to attack the zinnias because it has happened in my previous places.
Groundhogs actually eat it, so that's a problem, but they usually don't decimate it. Powdery mildew seems to be their kryptonite, and by the end of the season, they start looking gangly. For that reason, I have to give it 3 out of 5.
Color.
Saying zinnias are colorful is the understatement. Their brilliant pinks and magentas almost hurt our eyes. To be frank, I don't usually like those tones. They can be a bit too much and too loud. What redeems them for me is that there are several varieties, newer ones especially, that have more muted tones and some that have tertiary color harmonies that are really the definition of tasteful color harmony. If you think about it, they sported millennial pink before it was cool, so 5 out of 5 blooms for sure. Now, is it cottage enough? Not quite. They do fit well within the genre, but they do not define it. I think the blooms just lack a bit of romanticism, so for that reason, I have to give it 4 out of 5.
Linaria is our 6th contestant.
The fabric of cottage gardens is woven by small flowers, and Linaria is just one of them. I just discovered this plant because it's not as common as other flashier plants. When I was perusing the seed catalog, I thought that they were really similar to Snapdragons. The structure is very similar to the flower, but the scale isn't. That's why I classed them under sprawler plants.
Ease of cultivation.
Is Linaria easy enough to cultivate? Yeah. They do have small seeds that can be a bit of a hassle to handle, but they're not that challenging anyways. Linaria is one of those plants that prefers to be direct sown. It does, however, have very tiny seeds. So about 2 weeks ago, what I did is I planted them in the larger cups and I put them outside and covered it with a sheet of old plastic. Why? Because Linaria, besides having really tiny seed, it needs to be exposed to light. But there's also another thing. It likes a little bit of winter time before it wants to sprout. Thing is, it's not very good at competing with other plants. For that reason, I have to give it a 3 out of 5.
Location flexibility.
It only really did well in a sunny spot, and it kind of languished amongst other plants. I usually prefer plants that can battle their way through other plants. For that reason, I have to give it a 3 out of 5.
Speed and duration of bloom.
While it does produce the blooms fast, they don't last that long and the plant dies soon afterwards. So they're very ephemeral plants. For that reason, I can only give it 2 out of 5.
Impact and bloom.
I'm quite surprised and frankly underwhelmed by the Linaria. It's just that I had this vision that they were bigger, showier flowers, but they are not. I should have read the description better. They have performed well otherwise, and it makes sense to use them near the edges of paths and things like that because they're short. So it might turn into one of my favorite plants to grow in early spring. It might be the case that I need to plant a lot of it in masses.
While Linaria flowers are not insignificant, they're not loud either. For their size, they do okay, so I'll give it a 3 out of 5 blooms.
Pest and disease resistance.
I didn't notice any disease or pest pressure, but I only grew it once, so I'll give it 5 out of 5 for now, but it's only based on my experience.
Color.
Color-wise, Linaria does punch above its weight. The variety I grew had wonderful tones that made sense with my color scheme, but it does have other jewel tone and also pastels available. For that reason, I give it 4 out of 5.
Does it cottage?
It certainly is a cottage garden flower. Its small and delicate structure makes it perfect to round out corners and fill up gaps, so I have to give it 5 out of 5 on this one.
Our final contestant is China Aster.
China Aster excels at being what it is. It's a flower I hadn't grown much in the past, but after trying it, it for sure is a keeper. The plant itself definitely serves as a bushy form.
Ease of cultivation.
It's not as easy to cultivate because starting it from seed can be a bit of a challenge. The seeds don't always germinate readily because many times the batch is not as fresh as it should be. I've often bought packets that were fully non-viable. They also take quite a while to grow in their seedling form, so I definitely recommend starting them indoors and growing them under grow lights several weeks before you intend to put them out. But once they're established, they're really trouble-free, so I have to give them 2 out of 5 here.
Location flexibility.
I found that this plant is quite flexible in terms of location. It blooms wildly in sunny spaces, but also in shady spots. In the old cottage garden, it grew spectacularly well under the vine of grape, so I have to give it 5 out of 5.
Speed and duration of bloom.
As I said earlier, it takes a while for them to get going, but once they do, the blooms last for a long time. They also make for great cut flowers. For this reason, they get 4 blooms in this category.
Impact in bloom.
Do they have impact? Of course they do. They're romantic and at the same time classical form. It elevates a garden into the realm of dreams. I can't stress enough how well these perform, so I must give it 5 out of 5.
Pest and disease resistance.
I did not have trouble growing them in terms of pests and diseases, so for now it's 5 out of 5 for me.
Color.
They may not have too many color options, but the ones they do are wonderful. I grew a specific apricot variety that has a perfect tone of a warm pink that's dynamic, and it also highlights the pom-pom-like blooms. What I like the most is that the color is picked up more intensely near the center of the blooms because of the architecture of the flower. This shadow play gives a sophistication that a marigold could only dream of. I've got to give it 5 out of 5 here.
Does it cottage?
Amongst the daisies, the China Aster is the cottage garden ambassador. So it's really not a surprise that it gets a 5 out of 5 here. So who's the cottage garden conqueror amongst these 7 annuals? After tabulating the results, in 3rd place we have Snapdragon with an average of 4.25 blooms. The runner-up is the highly reliable and pigmented Zinnias with an average of 3.75 blooms. But the title of conqueror goes to none other than the China Aster with 4.5 blooms. And Marigold takes the last place with 2.5 blooms. I hope you like this format, and if you want to see me rank more cottage garden flowers, please let me know in the comments. I am working on new episodes for the Cottage Garden Design Masterclass series, and I hope you are looking forward to them. If you'd like to support the channel, you can buy art from my Etsy shop or become a patron. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.